something. Can somebody remember the first story they were ever told? What's the first story you remember?
It was a bedtime story.
What was it?
So it was about basically two parrots, like if I can correctly remember, who was supposed. So both of them were supposed to get married. So my mother used to every time she used to tell me that a story of how they met and they prolong and put in a little more here and there stuff just to prolong the story every time and just to put me to sleep. So that was a story about two parrots. It's something that's something I remember, not completely, but
Okay.
bits about it.
Okay. So this was just a story to put you to sleep. But it's interesting that it had a purpose, right? The purpose was to put you to sleep. Most stories don't have that purpose to put you to sleep. Most stories have a purpose to wake you up. Aside from, stories just for the sake of entertainment, where else do we hear stories? Where do we hear stories which are given for a reason?
I think every time we are out buying something,
Who tells us the story?
the seller, every time we're, it's basically we're all selling stories to each other. That's what I think.
Yeah. So you're saying advertising is a story, right?
I think politicians also tell us good
Yeah, okay.
stories.
Yeah, great. Politicians as well, sellers. And so Rashi is saying, I'm not sure about advertising, but even sellers. So give me an example, Rashi.
All right. So, for example, I'm out there to buy some vegetables, and I tell the vegetable vendor that, oh, this is not that great a quality of vegetable. And then they'll tell me a story that no, इस मौसम में तो ऐसे ही मिलेगा. ये तो बहुत fresh सब्जी है. आप इसको you just smell it. It's really nice. So it's a story that they try and build up, and I kind of relate to it. That, probably that person is probably right. So I might even take that thing.
Okay.
They go as
Okay,
far
so
as to say that बना के देखिए अब दोबारा आएंगे, याद रखेंगे, all of that.
yeah. So it's a prompt to action, right? That story is a prompt to action. It's to tell you to buy something. Advertisers use stories as well, right? One of my favorite examples of a story told by an advertiser is Nike. Does anybody remember the Nike slogan? Karen? Yeah.
Just do it.
Do it.
Just do it, right. What a great story, right? Because it says go out and do something, go out and exercise. And it doesn't even necessarily have to say use Nike, but it's immediately creating.
You muted yourself.
Okay. So it's such a beautiful story, right? Because it immediately prompts you into action and it unconsciously builds up that link between Nike as a brand you use when you do it. And whether that do it is running or cycling or jogging or whatever it is, it creates that link between the two. Any other examples you can think of brands or companies that tell stories?
घड़ी सर्फ पहले इस्तेमाल करें फिर विश्वास करें.
Right. When I was in Hindustan Lever 40 years ago, there was this story कि उसकी कमीज मेरे कमीज से सफेद क्यों, right? So it was a story about what was the underlying message over there. One is safed, that's obvious. Surf makes your clothes whiter. But yeah, zindagi ke saath bhi, zindagi ke baad bhi. What is the underlying message in that story about bhala uski kameez mere kameez se safed kyun? Comparison and
Keeping up with the Jones.
Exactly right. So there's there's an element of envy, right? So, um, why should my shirt not be as good as that person's shirt? So, if the person had just said, for really white shirts, use surf, do you think it would have worked as well as that message? कि भले उसकी कमीज मेरी कमीज से सफेद क्यों?
No, not at all.
Yeah, why?
The idea should be relatability. Something that is realistic to relate to is something that can attract someone to actually be more engaged with the story. So
Right.
I've
So,
actually
you're absolutely right, but I want to fix on a word which goes one level deeper than relating, relates to your emotions. Envy and jealousy are very powerful emotions. And a lot of advertising relates to human emotions. Successful advertising relates to emotions. So I can relate to the fact that I want a white shirt. So that's not the problem. The reason it works is that it evokes that emotional response in me.
And
Why
leads
should
to
I
action.
be? Sorry?
I said, and leads to action. So some kind of behavior change.
Right. So it's got to be actionable. But first, it creates that emotional response in me and then leads to action. Right? Now, this example over here, Zindagi ke saath bhi, zindagi ke baad bhi. The moment you say zindagi ke baad, what are you thinking of?
My family,
Death.
my kids.
Yeah.
Right. Death, insecurity, family, responsibility, all packed into that one phrase, zindagi ke baad bhi. Right? So, full of emotion and call for action, as Karen said. That if I want to be responsible, not just now, but even after I die, boss, I better do something. I better take out an LIC policy. So just look at the art over here. That in just a few words, you are creating an emotional response and you are creating a call to action. Okay? This is why I believe that some of the best stories in the world are told by advertisers. Because their life depends on telling stories. I can say that, this is a really tasty snack food. For that, I don't need an advertiser. But a really good advertising agency will find some way to relate it to the consumer, relatability, as Ryan said, some call to action, and thereby create a long and enduring story around the product. Okay. Now, somebody talked about, if there are any other examples that come to your mind, please share them with the group.
So in the chat, we have an example of Lay's.
Okay, right.
I can have just one.
There is an example of surf axle like Dag Akshay that reminds of us of the like Holi sometimes.
Right, right, right.
There-
Okay.
There was one, I'm sorry, one specific one that has lasted for about a decade or so more with me at least. It was the Airtel ad between two children playing on the LOC, India and Pakistan's. This was a very old one,
Right,
but
I remember it.
there is a sense of relatability also. But then there was also a very mature way of also talking in terms of state of affairs. Actually, why should children be also affected by what's happening in the world? Like there were two children playing football in the LOC itself by the end of it.
Right.
that one.
Great, great. So there's the emotional connect there is very strong. The call for action is left a little sort of vague, and mature brands can do that. Brands which are well known, they can afford to do stories like that. Big brands, brands which are not so well known and which are trying to create a share for themselves in the marketplace, they need to have a very, very direct call for action. And sometimes very, very mature brands completely abandon the call for action. There's never a call for action, but they create a mood. I'll give you one example, which is Amul. Right? That they come up with a topical ad. It's around politics or current affairs or sports or movies or whatever. It's just a play on words. There's no call for action. Nobody asks you to go out and buy. But they've created that mood around the brand, which always makes you feel it's, even despite being a 70-year-old brand, it's still very current. It still feels topical. It still feels fresh. And so it's just doing a job of renewal. It's not telling some story which makes you go out and buy because you're buying it already. So the point is that the story that you tell and the way in which you tell it also has to do with where you are in your life cycle. Just like the promise I hold out to friends as somebody who's in his mid-60s would be very different from the promise that you would hold out to your friends if you're in your 20s. I would tell my friends, come over, let's have a leisurely chat. Maybe in 10 years, I'll say, let's have a chat about old times. Okay. Whereas somebody who's in their 20s would say, come on, let's go out and have some fun. Right? If I told my friends today, let's go out and have some fun, somebody will say, oh, my back is paining, oh, my neck is paining, oh, I can't eat anything sweet. And so it would be meaningless, right? So the message that you give has also got to be very meaningful to the audience that you're relating to. If I was to say, let's go to a club and go dancing, they'd say, you mad? Right? So that's the other thing about stories. This all hinges on the same point, Rayan, that you were making about relatability. So it's got to have some resonance in the mind and the heart, more specifically, of the audience that you're talking to. Okay. So let's switch to another topic which somebody else came up with, which was politics. He said politicians also use stories. Can somebody give me an example? If you are going to say something, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, Pranav.
So once there, it was I'm talking about Lal Yadav. So basically, when Japanese came to Bihar and they told that give us that Bodhi temple, he told him that give us Japan, we will make Japan Bihar in like within 100 days.
That's not a great message. Okay, some successful messages, messaging from.
Yeah, I think I mean, the Chaiwala story really inspires people as how he has started his journey and how he has become a prime minister now. So he always repeats that whenever he addresses people. I mean, वो बहुत standard सा ऐसे सबके दिमाग में चला गया. So I mean, that's a strong point for him.
Right.
So he's a chaiwala and now he's a prime minister. So something. And yeah, some local politicians, they tell you a lot of stories that they'll make this, that and all. But some stories they really build very strong so that.
So let's come up with examples of stories. Let's come up with examples of stories from politics that actually contributed to the success, that actually mobilized people. Because that's one of the points that we're trying to make, that advertising is a call for action. Have there been stories from politics that were calls for action? Absolutely, that's a great one. Yeah, yeah. So though it's not a story, but yes, it is a call for action. It's a call for action, and it was followed up by a lot of action on part of the government as well, and a great story. Okay, can we go to something from history, Indian history?
Most of the politicians speaking to Maharashtra, they will start with, Shivaji Maharaj stories, and they will incorporate that subtly into their conversation. Maybe there is not much of head and tail, but they will make a mark on the people by using the name of Shivaji Maharaj and their stories.
And Marathi Manus.
And Marathi Manus, yes. So
Okay.
they can do that very well. Then there are so many cases that happens, Girni Kamgar or something like that, related to the mill. They will use that plot and then they can build up their own things.
Right. So now Vani has said Dandi March. Okay. Vani, you want to say something about how successful Dandi March was or otherwise? Vani? Oh, okay. She's at work, won't be able to talk. Okay, fine. So she's moonlighting. Huh? Vani, so I think actually Dandi March is a great idea. In fact, I had it in my notes. So is there anybody who doesn't know about Dandi March? Everybody knows about Dandi March, right? So Dandi March was, I think, one of the most powerful political actions. It wasn't a slogan, but it was, see what Gandhi did. This was the time of the British. The British were colonial powers, right? And his larger effort was to create a sense of illegitimacy, that the British should not be ruling us. Now, he was looking, see, one thing that a politician needs to do always is to mobilize people, okay? To get people behind him. The call for action is very, very imperative for a politician. So what did he do? He identified something with which every human being could relate, which is salt. We all consume salt every day, 2 or 3 times a day. And he said, look, that salt is given to us by Mother Nature. It's given to us. It is on our land. It's on land that belongs to us. Anybody can go to the seaside, to an area where salt is available, and pick it up. How dare the British tax it? See the simplicity of the idea. That the British were taxing something which the poorest person in India could consume, which doesn't require factories or any sophisticated processing, and which every person, irrespective of how rich or poor they are, how dare they tax this? So he used that simple pinch of salt to communicate a very powerful idea of injustice. And by doing so, he gathered millions of people to walk along with him to the sea. And as somebody said, in terms of the coverage of the message, Amrita says this, in terms of the coverage of the message, everyone in India knew about it, even when there was no social media. That was the power of the idea. The actual slogan didn't matter because the idea itself was so powerful. And Vani then says, salt became a larger metaphor for the time about resilience and a massive movement for people to follow the idea of independence. It became an advertisement of a kind that was relevant to every Indian's daily life. Exactly. Right? Somebody's come up with the idea of Chipko movement. Chipko movement never became as powerful or as big. But again, this is a very simple idea, which is of women in the mountains saying that our livelihoods depend on the forests because we collect the fallen wood from the forest in order to burn the chulas on which we cook food for our families. If the forests die out, then there'll be no grass. If there's no grass, then we won't be able to feed our cows. If we can't feed our cows, we won't have milk for our children. And again, the same idea. These trees are given to us by Mother Nature. The foresters and the contractors who come and cut these trees take them away from us. And they're robbing us. Again, a very, very simple idea. And they didn't use words, they directly used action. Chipko meant that they went and hugged the trees. Very, very simple, great image. No advertising agency could have come up with a better image than poor women from Uttarakhand hugging a tree and saying the contractors are taking away what belongs to us. So this was not politics as followed by political parties or great leaders like Gandhi or Nehru. This is politics of a different kind, politics of the individual trying to protect their own rights. Okay? And from the independence movement, you see lots of such ideas. I think the biggest one was quit India. 2 words. It encompassed everything. And 100 years later, we still talk about quit India. Right? And again, what was it saying? Quit means what? Quit means leave. That which does not belong to you. If somebody is sharing my house with me, if they're my sister or brother, I can't say quit. Right? I can ask them to leave. But quit means that which is not naturally yours. It's a very simple word, but there's a lot of emotion buried in it, which is this is not yours. Just like I will tell somebody to quit alcohol, okay? Because it's not something natural to your diet. But I won't tell them to quit bananas or quit roti, because that's natural to them. So this lovely use of this word, quit India, and the interesting thing I found when I was researching for this talk was that quit India, though we associate the phrase with Mahatma Gandhi, it was actually not written by Mahatma Gandhi. Would anybody know who is the person who wrote this phrase? I didn't know it myself till a couple of hours ago. So it was written by a congressman called Yusuf Meher Ali. But, it's just like a movie actor, right? We remember great lines from Amitabh Bachchan or from Dharmendra or from Shah Rukh, and we associate them with that person, but they weren't written by them, right? They were written by some scriptwriter, and we'll never really know who it is. So that's not important. The point is that words have so much depth in them, so much nuance. Leave India would not be the same as quit India. It wouldn't carry as much emotional force. And as Dipali says, at the same time as quit India, you also had Simon go back. Again, it's the same thing. Go back. It's not saying go, it's saying go back. Back means what? To where you belong. Because this is not where you belong. This is where I belong. This is my home. You go back, you don't belong over here. So, when you're telling stories in very, very, very few words, every word has got to carry a lot of weight in it. And that weight relates to these very powerful emotions. Look at the emotions that we've been when we talked about surf, what is the emotion? Envy. When we talked about salt, it was about simplicity. It was about mine. Mine is a very powerful word. This is mine, this is not yours. Very powerful words. Go back. You don't belong over here. So these are all about belonging. They're all about, even if we look at the chaiwala phase, what is it about? We're talking about two very powerful things here. Can somebody identify them for me? What is the point of chaiwala? Why does it have so much power?
Coming out of like from like बहुत, somewhere backward to like on the top of the
Right. Now, if you go one level deeper, what is he saying? What he was saying was, and this is something that he keeps saying, exactly, symbol that any common man can become PM. And see, he keeps saying this time and time again, that I'm against dynasty. What is the point? The point was that the leaders from the Congress are only leaders because they belong to a certain family. And if it's like somebody inherits their business, that doesn't mean they're a good businessman. They've just inherited it. Whereas I had to become a really good politician despite having no baggage. Just like in Bollywood also, you hear about star children and you hear about outsiders, right? So the Kapoors can't say that they are outsiders. Shah Rukh Khan can say he's an outsider. So what is the powerful emotion over here? The powerful emotion is class. Outside, inside. Upper class, lower class. So it's about identity and belonging. So when you look at it, the triggers for powerful stories are very, very simple ones. They're just emotional triggers. They're about belonging, inside, outside, class, envy. And the biggest one that we hear about today when we look at Instagram is what? FOMO. Fear of missing out, right? It's the same thing. It's emotion. Hey, what am I missing? It's appealing to that emptiness inside of us, that we need something from outside to complete our lives. So it's a completely new phenomenon, right? Instagram and FOMO. But it's appealing to exactly the same thing that the surf ad did, which is that his wife has given him something which my wife has not. It's the same emotion. 30 years later, new format, new technology, but human emotions don't change. And good stories appeal to those human emotions. Okay, so we've covered advertising and politics. Let's look at a third area, which is the third major area of our lives where stories play a powerful part. Also to do with connecting with masses. Books, of course, books is just a medium. Books are a medium, films are a medium, songs are a medium. They all tell stories. Religion, Krati says, absolutely right. Absolutely right. So what is religion about finally? Religion is about fear. So hopefully religion is about more than fear. But what is religion? What is the objective of religion? Belief is a means. Faith is what it tries to instill. But what is the objective of religion?
to live a peaceful life, like a systematic life.
So yeah. So it is a prescription for a better life. Okay. It's telling you that if you want to lead a better, more meaningful way of living, it tells you that you must speak the truth, you must be nice to people, you must be respectful to people, etc., etc. Turn the other cheek, etc., etc., etc. Now, the point is that if I take any religion, I can probably write down the 5 or 10 most important things about the religion on one blank piece of paper. Okay? Like if you look at Christianity, there were the 10 commandments. Okay? Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not tell lies, thou shalt not covet um, thy neighbor's wife, etc., etc. You can write them down. But is that how religion was taught to the masses? No. How was it taught? It was taught by stories, right? What is the Ramayana? What is the central idea of the Ramayana?
Victory over
Evil. Good
yes,
over evil.
evil. Yes.
Victory of good over evil, and Ram as an Adarsh Purush. Right? You can differ with it. And, I certainly, ideal king, exactly. So, I have my problems with all of these stories, but that's not the point that I'm making. The point is that rather than listing down 5 things which make an ideal king or Adarsh Purush or, victory of good over evil, what did they do? They created a story. And this is true of Christianity. This is true. The Bible is essentially a collection of story after story after story after story after story. And the Ramayana is a story, and the Mahabharata is a story. And the kernel, the philosophy of the Gita is actually a very abstract philosophy, right? But how is it told? It's not told as an abstract philosophy. It's told as a war, and in the middle of that war, Arjun suddenly starts having doubts, and Krishna appears to him and tells him that this is how you should behave, and this is the reason that you should behave like this. So what teachers have found over the ages is that if you want to teach something, especially something which is philosophical, something which appeals to the hearts, you need to tell a story. Because the stories will remain. You may forget the exact lessons or the way, but the story will always remain. And so, whether it is brands, whether it is politics, whether it is religion, people have learned that to exercise some kind of control or mobilization of people, the best way is to tell stories. It's not to tell them what you do, but to tell them a story which engages them, and through that engagement gives them an idea of what they should do. And over the last 100 or 150 years, or let's say, stories, as far as we know, are as old as humankind. And through most of history, those stories were told from mouth to ear. And converting those stories to writing is only 4,000 or 5,000 years old, depending. And that would be very laborious. First, it used to be on a clay tablet with a stylus, and then gradually paper and pen. But it was only 400 or 500 years ago, when the press was invented in Germany by Gutenberg, that we started getting those stories on paper, which led to the mass dissemination of stories. The Bible was the first book that got printed and went around the world, and so on and so forth. But in the last 100, 150 years ago, those stories can now be told in so many different ways. So radio was a different way of telling story from person to person. But then you had theater, and you had cinema, and then you had television, and now you have YouTube, and you have TikTok, and you have Instagram. But if you look at any of these, the most successful people in any of these genres are people who are telling stories. And the same thing with politicians. And they've learned to use all these media. Earlier, a successful politician had to stand on a stage and make a speech. Today, he can do it in Man Ki Baat or on television or whatever it is. But the essence remains the same, finding a way to appeal to the hearts and minds of people. That is the essence of a story. And if the story at the end of it has a call to action, then it works even better. So this is really. So somebody, Sriram says, I feel stories are always a reflection of our minds, not inspiration or motivation. So, Sriram, what you're saying is right, but we're not talking about all stories. We're talking about how stories are used. We're not saying that all stories are used to motivate or inspire. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying who are the people that successfully use stories for a purpose. I'm saying that politicians have learned to use stories, that advertisers have learned to tell stories for their own reasons, and that religions use stories. As a storyteller, I can tell a story just for the joy of telling story or sharing my life or my mind or whatever. That will always remain. Here we are talking about the functional use of stories. So Sriram says, got it. Yeah. So now the question and the reason that we are having this session is, what does all of this that we've discussed for the last 40 minutes, what does this have to do with entrepreneurship? That's the reason that Aishwarya asked me to take this session. So in a sense, one part of it we've already answered, right? Which is that when you have a product to sell, remember that you must have a story to sell. Otherwise, the product has no use. It's no point holding up something and saying, oh, this is very nice, this does a very good job. That's not a good enough story. There needs to be a story to it. So that's advertising. That's like the end point of what you do as an entrepreneur, which is, you have an idea and then you find money in order to develop that idea, and then you create a team around it, and then you produce it, and then finally you go out and sell it. And in order to sell it, you need to have that story. That's clear. So that's the end point. But before you get there, before your product is out in the market and you're still an entrepreneur, that means that you're somebody who has a new idea and you want to find ways in which to get this product out there. Then, yeah, that's a good question. Is data also a story? Yeah, data is often a story. A good point. Anyway, we'll come to that. So what is the relationship or the relevance of a story to an entrepreneur? Can somebody give me some views on that?
May I?
Yeah, please.
So, what an entrepreneur does, they find out a problem, and behind that problem, there is always a story.
There's always a
story. So, and there is another story when they try to solve that problem.
That's a little vague. So, see this question of problem and solution. Okay, so this is very often the story told at the time that you sell a product. Okay, which is that, yeah, absolutely. So let me just finish. Which is that you have, you're being troubled by rats. That's your problem. Here's my solution: a rat poison. Okay, so and you're right that an entrepreneur starts off by trying to solve that problem. Okay? So he starts with a problem, he tries to find a solution to it. Once he finds a solution, he sells it to the consumer. Now he may sell it to the consumer just on this problem solution thing. You have rats, here's a rat poison. Or he may sell it in a more emotional story, which is that rats bring germs into your house. So he creates fear. So he creates an emotion, right? And if you don't want the plague to spread in your house, or if you don't want the rats to be eating your children at night when they're sleeping in their beds, then you better get my poison. So that's a different way of selling it. So one is just more problem solution, the other is some emotional appeal, etc., etc. But long before that, the problem in his head, he's looking for a solution. He may not yet have got the solution, or he may have sort of started to figure out something about the solution. What is the use of a story to him then? Now, Sambhavi has said something. The journey of an entrepreneur involves telling stories to get funds and to convince his clients. These come at two ends of the entrepreneur's journey. The first end is, if you're an entrepreneur, you need money to start your business, right? Now, maybe your father or your mother or your uncle or your granduncle has that money. But even if your uncle has the money, you've got to get him to give it to you, right? How do you do that? You've got to tell him a story, right? You've got to tell him why you need that money. And the best way to do it is to sell that idea to him through a story. If you say, Chacha ji, मैंने एक factory लगानी है, मुझे पैसे चाहिए. What's the next question? Is he going to say, okay, ye lo? Unlikely, right? He'll ask you some questions, right? What's the question he'll ask you next? What factory? And you'll say something, yeah. What factory? What are you going to produce over there? And you'll say, I'm going to produce this chemical. Why are you going to produce this chemical? Because it kills rats. So, in essence, you're telling him a story. But again, it comes to how well you tell that story. And now imagine this is not your chacha. This is some rich guy like me who says, I'm willing to put money into startups. Right? I get 1,000, literally, I get between 700 and 1,000 new business ideas every year. And what makes the difference over there is, what is the story that this person is telling me? Okay. Now, what do you think are the key elements of the story of this entrepreneur to me? Let's say you have a business idea or you have a social idea, something that will bring help to some community, and you're coming to somebody who has money. What do you think I want to know? What do you think will move me? What are the elements of the story that you tell me that will actually make a difference to me? Social benefit. Okay.
If that story is appealing to a big population or not.
Okay. So now, somebody says social benefit. No, somebody, the same person says social benefit. and economic profit. Okay. Now, these are two very different stories. Each of these stories has a different outcome. And what Amrita says is very important. She says, it's only if that story interests you personally. Okay. And this goes back to the point that Rian made at the beginning, which is relatability. Before you go and tell the story to this person, you need to understand the person. Some people who write checks are only interested in the return. They're only interested कि मैंने अगर इसमें 10 lakh रुपए लगाए, do I have a good chance of this 10 lakhs becoming 50 lakhs or a crore? And some people, let's say for example, an Azim Premji, he doesn't need more money. He's made tens of thousands of crores, and everybody knows that he is a philanthropist. He wants to use his money for good purpose, right? So to him, you will not go to somebody who's worth 100,000 crores and say, put 10 lakhs in my business and it'll become 50 lakhs. He's not interested. You might have that story for me because my profession is an angel investor. I'm writing checks because I want my money to multiply. But Azim Premji is writing checks for people who can bring about change, what Meenakshi said. So the story that you tell, again, like all stories, it's got to go back to the basics, which is that it's got to relate to what that person is interested in. It's the same thing. Meenakshi can say changing people's lives, inspiring others. This may be relevant for Narayan Murthy or Azim Premji because they've set up foundations who want to do this, or to an Oxfam. But you come and tell me the story, I say, very nice, but I'm not going to give money because I'm not in the business of charity. Right? If you go further, there are some, what we call angels, people who write checks to support startups, some who specialize in funding businesses which are software businesses, SaaS businesses. There's some people who specialize in education. There are some people who specialize in food products. Again, the same thing. If you come to me and say, I have this idea to create this software that will enable software writers to develop games faster, I'm not interested. I don't know anything about this. So what is the relevance of this to an entrepreneur? The relevance of this to an entrepreneur is do your homework. When you have a story to tell, make sure that you are telling it to a person to whom that story has some value. Otherwise, don't tell that story. Your story must be relatable to the person to whom you're going to tell that story. So this is one part of it. What is the other part of that story? The first part is, I want to do this. And I know that you're interested in this area. That's one part of it. What is the part that's missing over here? What am I going to ask? Yes, I'm interested in better schools. You're interested in better schools. But what's the next question that I'm going to ask? Plans, yeah, sure. But before plans and how you do is all part of the same thing. This is what Dell is saying. He doesn't look like Dell. I'm sure he has a name. But anyway. So how it will happen, how will you do that? What's missing is you. Why you? What makes you specially qualified to do it? That, to anybody who is writing checks, that is actually the crux of the problem. Remember that a business is more than a business plan. A business is more than a spreadsheet. A business is an entrepreneur. It's somebody who's willing to put their heart and soul into something. And I need to be convinced that you are the person for it. And you have got to convince me. If you can't convince me of that, I'm not interested. Yeah, it's a great idea, but I don't think you can do it. So you've got to convince me that, how will you do that? First thing is that I've got to believe that it matters enough to you, that you really care about this. It's not just another idea, I've got to do something, मैं ये कर लूंगा. मैं बस्तर जाके लोगों के लिए घर तैयार करूंगा. It's a hard life. You've got to deal with the politicians, you've got to deal with the local villagers, you've got to deal with the mafia, you've got to deal with the Marxists. Do you really care enough about it to spend the next 5 years doing it? Are you physically tough enough to do it? Do you have an adequate understanding of the politics of that area? So I think this is the part that needs a lot. It's like selling yourself. I am the best person to do it because I care, because this is what it takes to, for example, build a rocket. I studied rocket science at MIT, and I worked for 5 years at NASA. And now I think that its time is right for India to have its own rockets, as an example. So now you're bringing together into the story 3 issues. The first is that the person to whom you're telling the story, it should matter to them. The second is that I really care about this, and I'm going to put my heart and soul into it. And the third is that I am well equipped to do this. All 3 of these have got to come together for that story to make an impact on the person who's going to write the check. Okay. So this is the second set of stories that an entrepreneur needs to tell. The first is to the client, which actually comes later, so we can call that the second. The first is when he's trying to raise the money, but there's one in between. What is that? One is to raise the money and get the project started. The other is to sell the product to the customer. There's something in between. What is that? Are you going to run the business alone or the enterprise? You've got to build a team. And nothing builds a team better than a story. We're all in it together because this matters to all of us. And again, storytelling plays a very, very, very powerful role over here. We're running out of time, so I'll just share one story with you, okay? Which is that I'm the co-founder and chairman of a company called Teamwork Arts. Okay? Now, Teamwork Arts is best known for, I'm just going to move because I'm running out of power. So Teamwork Arts is best known for something called the Jaipur Literature Festival. Okay. And the Jaipur Literature Festival, for those who don't know about it, is probably the world's most successful festival of books and literature. And as the name suggests, it takes place in Jaipur every January. And now the thing is that there are hundreds of book festivals all around the world. And yet, in a very short span of 15 years, the Jaipur Literature Festival has become one of the best known festivals in the world. Now, how did we do this? We did it from a very simple, not a story. See, stories work if they're true. They don't work if they're not true. Um, so if Nike said just do it, it wouldn't work if the shoes weren't really good. So the story has got to be backed by reality. But the reason this works is that both my co-founder and I, we both were actors on stage. And we worked a lot with musicians. And one of the things we realized is that most producers, whether of theater or of festivals or whatever, they treat the performers very shabbily. The audience comes first, the money comes second, and the performers come third. We said our central focus is on the performer, on the artist. Because you can't have a festival, whether it's of music or of theater or of books, without the actor, the lighting technician, in the case of literature festival, the author. The author comes first. And sometimes when I'm flying to Jaipur for the festival, sitting next to me, inevitably, either in the waiting lounge or on the plane, will be some other author who doesn't know me by face. They don't know who I am. I just talk to them. You're going to Jaipur. What are you going to Jaipur for? I'm going to the Jaipur Literature Festival. Okay. And so how did you get here? And slowly then they'll tell me about the person in teamwork who's been corresponding with them. And tell them, how many festivals have you been to? Someone will say 2, someone will say 20, someone will say 200. And I'll ask them, so how does this festival compare to that? Oh, we are so well treated. People in teamwork, they really look after the authors. Now, this didn't happen by accident. It happened because we told a story. We told our people, you are nothing. The artist is everything. Your job is to make life for the artist better. So this is as important a story as the story that you tell your customers. And it's a much more important story than the story you tell to raise money, because you tell the story to raise money only once, hopefully, or twice. But this story, you have to tell every day, because you're engaging with your team every day. You're hiring a team every day. And if you really believe in this story, whether that story is quality matters or content matters or customers matter or whatever it is, then you've got to build that story into the journey of your employee from day one. From the interview to the induction process to the review process to the increments, it's got to all be related to that one story. So I'm going to finish here just by reminding you that stories are extraordinarily important, whether you're a politician, an advertiser, a priest, founding a new religion, or founding a new company. But remember some of the key components of that story, which is that keep them simple. A long story is no use. You should be able to tell the core of the story in less than one sentence. Just do it. Quit India. Chaiwala. Do good. Artist is important. So very simple story. It's got to relate to emotional content, not to facts. It's got to relate to people. And it's got to be real. If I tell that story that the authors really matter, but when the festival is on, I'm sitting and having a drink with my sponsors and I don't have time for the authors, that story just backs up. But if I'm actually standing at the entrance to receive the authors when they come and give them the maximum bhav, then that story works. So stories are not fiction. Stories in this context have got to be real, and you've got to be prepared to back them up with your own action and with your own experience. The best stories are those which you genuinely believe in, not stories that you create for a purpose, to raise money or to sell a product, but that you actually believe in and that you put substantial resources behind. So happy to take a few questions or any shared experiences, or better still, shared stories. No? No questions?
Okay. No,
You are a little muffled, Ren.
okay. So am I still like understandable? Oh, okay. Maybe I'll just type it out.
Yeah, just type it into chat. What stories have moved you in the world of angel investment? Oh, that's a great question. So actually, yeah, the story that really moved me is actually, it's very funny, because I think of all the companies that I've invested in, the one with which I have the deepest engagement actually began not with a story by, it's very funny, okay? So it began with a story not by the founder, but a story by me, which was that I was speaking at a conference on the future of investing in startups in India. And I gave a story, I gave a lecture on Ayurveda, and how I think Ayurveda is one of the biggest offerings that India can make to the rest of the world, but also that it's going to be very, very difficult to create a business out of Ayurveda. And after the talk, a young man came up to me, and very shy young man came up to me, and he said, "Oh, you know, I found that very interesting, and I would like to come talk to you at home. Like to come and talk to you." So I said, "Sure." And he came and talked to me. And he had started a business which had 5 verticals in it, which included mythology and education and also Ayurveda. He said, "Will you mentor me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." But as I started talking to him, I told him, "You can't have 5 verticals in a starting business. You can just have one." And so he said, "Which one?" So I said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, Ayurveda." So he said, "You know, we have 5 verticals. We have one person in charge of each vertical. What am I going to do with them? I can't just wind up." So I said, I can't help you, such a young business. I can't in any conscience tell you to run 5 businesses. I can't split my mind over 5 areas. I don't think you can. So he brought his team to meet me, and gradually we all agreed that we would focus on that one idea, which was Ayurveda. His team also agreed that that made sense. And so that point in time, that was a business which had a turnover of about, it was not a tiny business, I had a turnover of about 2 crores a year. And the first thing that we had to do was to shut down 4 divisions. And so we went from 2 crores to 1 crore. But this was 6 years ago. The good story is that today it's a 200 crore business, and it was products in the US. Okay. My English conversation is very, very good. Yeah, that's my story, right? So going back, so somebody said, "I want to do advertising. Where should I begin?" So I think there's 2 parts to this. One is to improve your own skills, just in terms of writing, and there, there are lots of courses out of there, online, in person, etc., etc. But I think there's no shortcut but actually working for an advertising agency. Because the only way to understand how to practice advertising is to actually practice it. So to become an apprentice with an advertising agency and um, and see whether you have the skills for it. Somebody asked, I love creating stories, want to be an advertiser. Yeah. So first thing is write. Write regularly. And, a friend of mine told me that I must write regularly. And I was very lazy about it. But in November, I think of last year, I started a newsletter on Substack, which goes by the name of Gimme More, GIMMEMO. And so I developed that discipline. And now every Sunday, my newsletter goes out. I write about various things, which may or may not be interesting to you. So I'm not advertising that you should go to Give Me More. I'm just saying that it gave me that discipline of sending that newsletter out every week. And I'm a better writer because of it. Because every week I'm writing 1,000, 2,000 words. And over a space of, it's now been 41 weeks. That means that I've written about 40 or 50,000 words, which is a lot. So practice, find an audience. Where that audience is 10 people or 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. But you are actually your own best critic, because when you read it 2 days later, you'll see this worked, this didn't work. But simultaneously, attend a course, take a course, and try and find a job. Nothing works like that. Given that stories bring out very strong emotions, sometimes even unintended ones from listeners, how can we as a storyteller take responsibility for the unintended emotions brought out? I think that this goes back to that issue of relatability. Okay? And that's why, so I wouldn't tell a story about depression or suicide to someone who's depressive, right? And I wouldn't tell a story about sex to a 9-year-old. So I think the key issue is the audience, and that's why we have censorship and we have ratings on movies and so on and so forth. Beyond a point, you can't take any guarantees. But I think the two areas where one has to be, see, people have psychological frailties, and stories have got to be about psychology and emotion. And if some of your stories make people feel a little sad or whatever, I don't think that there's you can safeguard against that, because people do have those frailties. I think where I would draw the line, personally, is that I wouldn't tell stories which in any way glamorized violence. Okay? You can have violence in the story, but don't make violence or the violent person the hero. Don't make sexual assault the hero. You want to tell a story. So there's a word called, a very nice word in English called gratuitous, okay? Which means that don't do something which doesn't have value to it. So if you're writing about violence, do it for a reason. And the only reason, to my mind, can be to show how violence has no value. Don't just put violence in to make something exciting. So I would draw the line there. Beyond that, if you're telling a story which is about, so I think as a storyteller, the first requirement of a storyteller, these are things that I try and live by. One is that be honest, be truthful. And that has to do not just with, you're telling a story. So it's not necessarily about something that happened to you, but truthful in the sense that, why am I telling this story? What is the value to my telling this story? Is the story actually going to improve in any way, improve the lives of people? or tell them something which I think is going to make them think a little bit. So that honesty has got to be there. As long as you're honest with the story and you're honest with your reasons for telling the story, and you're not romanticizing violence or sexual assault or dishonesty or anything like that, then I think the responses that it evokes in other people become their responsibility. People carry their frailties, you can't be responsible for them. But be honest with yourself. If we are to tell the story of someone else, say a micro entrepreneur, are there some pointers that I should be mindful of? Great question. So I think when you're telling somebody else's story, the first prerequisite is to be a really good listener. Good interviewers don't just ask good questions. Good interviews listen. See, people love to talk. Here I am, I've been talking for an hour, right? People love to talk. And what people love to talk about the most is themselves. So give them that opportunity to talk. Give them time. Listen. And be patient. When you are interviewing people, don't just interview them about facts. See, just like we said, stories are about emotion. They're about relatability. So similarly, if you're asking people questions in order to tell their story, try and understand their emotions. Try and understand their background. Where did they come from? What made them think about this idea? Relate to them as human beings, because the best stories are those about human beings. So when you tell that story of that micro entrepreneur, tell it about him as a human being. What motivated him or her? What were the challenges? How did he or she overcome them? What difference did this journey make to that person's life? And then tell that story honestly. One of the mistakes that a lot of people, journalists especially, make, especially today, is to try and dramatize. Don't do that. Never dramatize. Tell stories as honestly as you can. And lastly, once you've written the story, take it back to that entrepreneur and show it to them. Get them to say, yes, this is right. How can a social enterprise differentiate itself through storytelling while operating in the same market? You see, there's no such thing as same market. Even if you take the most unskilled job, person A deals with person C and person B deals with person D. Okay. And why does one relationship work and the other not work? Again, it's about that relationship between you and the people you address. So if you're saying while catering to the same market, I wouldn't ask the question, how can a social enterprise differentiate itself through storytelling? I would say if somebody is already catering to that market, why are you in that business? Question is not what story should I tell? Question is before that, why should I be here if somebody's already tackling it? My only reason for being here is if I can do a better job. If I can bring more meaning to this job, otherwise I shouldn't be there. Bata is selling shoes. Why should Nike sell shoes if it's going to sell the same shoes? Not good enough. There's no reason. The only reason for Nike to come in is to say, you know what? Bata shoes are good, but they're not ideal for running. They don't have shoes which are specifically designed for basketball. And that's what we're going to bring. So this goes back to the same thing, which is there's got to be honesty in that story. I can't pretend to be different. I've got to be different. And then, obviously, the story too will be different. What medium is most effective in reaching out through stories to investors in today's age? So, typically, you reach out to investors in two ways. It's not one or the other, it's typically both. Often three. First is an email. Attached to that email will be a pitch deck or a presentation. And then at some point in time, you'll have a conversation. So each of these is a story. An email is a mini story. A pitch deck or a presentation is a slightly bigger story. And then finally, there'll be a personal conversation. Now, again, the same thing, which is I can tell you a story in 15 minutes or half an hour. But research is telling us that the first 15 seconds make all the difference when you're pitching to an investor. So find that relatability, express yourself, and the essence of why your idea matches to the consumer. We said these are the three things, right? Relate the idea to the investor. What is the problem you're solving? And why you? You should be able to tell all of these in 2 or 3 sentences in 15 seconds. If you get that right, then the medium is not important. It should be there in the email. It should be there in the first slide of the pitch deck. And it should be in the first 15 seconds that you talk to the investor. The medium is not important. From employment to entrepreneurship, what are the changes that are to be made? Again, that's not the right question. The right question is, I'm in a job. Should I become an entrepreneur? That's the question. And that relates to, so the first is that the idea that you have as an entrepreneur has really got to have you really excited. You have got to say that I'm willing to spend the next 5 years following this story. Number one. Number two, 90% of businesses fail. Therefore, there's a very, very, very strong chance that this business fails. If 5 years later, I find out that this failed, will I say what an idiot I was? Or will I say it was worth trying? That's the key thing. And if you're going to say, look, if it fails in 5 years, I wasted 5 years of my life, that is the right answer for 90% of people. Because not more than 1 in 10 people is cut out to be an entrepreneur. Understand yourself. If you can deal with the fact that I gave 5 years to something, it didn't work, fine, move on. Then do it. But if you say it's going to succeed, you're wrong. Because 9 times out of 10, it's not going to succeed. And is trying important enough for you? Third is, you've got to use to a certain standard of living, a certain paycheck that comes every month. As an entrepreneur, you may not have that for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Are you willing to, either do you have that much money saved, or are you willing to take that kind of cut in your standard of living. If you're not for you. When I went from working in the corporate sector to being an entrepreneur, I went from having a chauffeur-driven car and expense accounts and flying business class and staying in Taj hotels, having a corporate car and driver. Within a year, there were days when I didn't have 100 rupees in my pocket to fill in petrol into my mother's car. I didn't have a car. I used to borrow my mother's car, but I didn't have 100 rupees to put into her car. But I was clear, मैंने यही करना. And I lived that life for 7-8 years before money started coming and things started happening. You've got to be prepared for that. If you can't do it, don't do it. How did you find team members who believed in the story behind the work that you did, the Jaipur Literature Festival, as strongly as you did? So it's not, the question is not, doesn't fully represent the reality. We found people who had a genuine love of the arts, who really loved theater, music, dance, literature, etc., etc. And I think what was very important for us was that, unlike a company that writes software, for example, or a company that makes food products, for which people have studied. They study to be engineers or software designers or whatever it is. Here, you don't really find people who are qualified to do this. And in fact, a lot of these people are sort of like misfits. We don't want to sell soap, or we don't want to write software. We really like the arts. What do we do? So in a sense, that also became our comparative advantage, because we could say, okay, you care for the arts, come work for us. And we will train you and teach you to do what we do well. So I think the journey for us was that kind of journey. But I think it's been very successful and very important for us that we didn't try to take people who were already doing something and say, come and do it for us. We took young people who were passionate about the area that we were working in, and we exposed them to what we were doing. We trained them, and we told stories to them. And they lived those stories of how we care for artists, how we care for performers, how we care for our technicians, how we care for each other. And also one very interesting thing, which is that the name Teamwork. So, when we were founding the company, our partner said to me, what name do we give ourselves? So I said, let me think about it. And I spent 3 days sitting in my room all alone and thinking about names. And I finally came up with this name, Teamwork. And that became the core of our story, which is that we work as a team. And people keep on saying this, your name really describes your company well. But the interesting thing is the name doesn't describe the company, because the company didn't exist when the name was created, right? So the name, to some extent, created the company, because it created that story that this is about us. We do things together. It's not about me, the founder, it's about us. We do things together. So that too was a story. It became a central part of our story. Okay, last question I'm going to answer. How to improve English communication? Oh, that's a toughie. Yeah. Read as much as you can. Write as much as you can. Read good work. Don't read Instagram posts and don't read news in shorts. Read good writing. The masters were called masters because of something. Read good literature and write. Writing is the best way to improve your English. And I've been lucky, which is that since the time I was young, I love to get up in front of an audience and speak. So I've been speaking all my life, and I've been writing all my life. But I can still say today that every week, the quality of my communication is improving. And the reason that's happening is because I write every week. I spend 4 or 5 hours every week writing those 1,000 or 1,500 words. So it's like everything else. The more you do it, the better you are at it. If you want to become a better swimmer, I can stand you in front of a blackboard for 5 years and tell you everything about swimming. And actually can, because I'm a serious swimmer. I can tell you all about the fluid dynamic of swimming, about leverage, about muscles, about buoyancy, etc., etc. I can talk to you as long about swimming as I can talk to you about storytelling. But your swimming is not going to improve till you get out there. I swim 3 to 4 kilometers every week. And my swimming is still getting better. So my storytelling is getting better because I do it. So Nike, just do it.
Oh, I had a question. Sorry, I waited because there were so many questions. Can I ask that?
Okay, last question.
So I just wanted to ask, like, how to incorporate storytelling in day-to-day conversation. Yeah.
Sorry, how to?
Incorporate storytelling in day-to-day conversation. When you talk to people, and if you want to tell them something, how to express those things with some stories, little still stories.
Yeah. People like to hear stories. So I think people like to hear stories, but they also get bored if you tell stories badly. And that's actually the best way to learn, which is that when you find people getting bored, you realize that you're not doing a good job. So you need to shut up and think about what was it? Why did they get bored? Was I speaking too slowly? Was I using too many words? Was I not getting to the main point fast enough? Yeah. So think about all of those things. But again, read. So read novels, read short stories. There's some great masters of short stories. Premchand is a great master of short stories. Read him in Hindi, read him in English translations. There was, I think that, to my mind, I mean, I've read lots of short stories, but I think 3 or 4 were masters of storytelling. One was, as I said, Premchand. The other was an American short story writer called O. Henry. O. Henry. Manto, yeah, unfortunately, I've not read much Manto. I've read a few stories, but yeah, Manto. But O. Henry was a brilliant short story writer. 5, 6 pages, he could tell the most powerful stories. And the other was a Frenchman, and but is very widely translated. Again, a master of short story. It was called Guy, Guy, which is actually pronounced G, but Guy, D-E, de, and his surname was Maupassant, Maupassant. So Yeah, Ruskin Bond is a good storyteller, but I wouldn't call him a master, not like Manto or Premchand or O. Henry or G. Dhamapasa. These are masters. Nothing wrong with Ruskin Bond. So anyway, read Ruskin Bond, read Manto, read. Nothing like reading to improve your ability to tell stories.
Thanks a
And
lot.
of course, okay, wonderful. Thanks very much. Bye.